everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Yanis Benamor. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's event, both in person and also online. Just a few words about CSD. So the Center for Sustainable Development was created in 2016, and the goal is to help us reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 by coming up with innovative solutions. In particular, we work in three fields: health, education, and gender. In 2019, CSD started a new project called REACH, Refugees Act and Communicate for Health. And the goal of this project was to help Syrian refugees in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan to have access to good health information, but also have access to healthcare in their respective country. And so it's under this project that in 2021, so last year, we created a new partnership with Anadolu University, represented today by Professor Nezih Orhon, who will be our main speaker. And it's an absolute delight to welcome you to CSD today for your presentation. Our event today is co-sponsored by the School of Social Work at Columbia University, as well as CGC Istanbul, our very good friends who are helping us basically broadcast this event to the world. So without further ado, let me introduce my colleague, Dr. Anindita Desgupta, who will be the moderator for this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here and to introduce our incredible speaker. As Yanis mentioned, I'm Anindita Desgupta. I'm a research scientist at Columbia School of Social Work, and it's my great pleasure to also welcome you and introduce you for this great event. At the School of Social Work, we also have a unit on refugee work called Aspire, and the work is really focused on using academia and our resources to help improve the health of refugees globally. And so this presentation is going to be very much in line with all the pieces that we believe, and I'm looking forward to learning as much as possible. So it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker. So I'll read a quick bio and then we'll get started, and then we'll do some Q&A after that. So please forgive me, I'm going to read. I did not get a chance to memorize your bio. It's extensive. So Professor Nezih Orhon is a past dean and present member of the Anadolu University's Faculty of Communication Sciences and the head of the Department of Cinema and Television. He is also a lecturer at Rhein University in Germany. Professor Orhon delivers and supervises training programs and workshops on various subjects from film and media studies to advocacy, communication, and human rights at various international institutions such as UN Women, ILO, IOM, UNDP, UNFPA, and the European Union delegation in Turkey. A winner of the Turkish Public Relations Grand Prize in Health Communication, Professor Orhon is also Turkey's European Union Climate Treaty Ambassador. So it's my great pleasure to welcome, and looking forward to your speech.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for being here. I know the time is a value issue, so I'll try to be on time, and I'll be very happy if you have any questions or any discussions. I'm very open to that. So as benefiting from the name of the presentation, questioning the media and public discourse on one hand, and how we can actually read or reassess, reevaluate attention and inclusion strategies for refugees on the other side. So I would like to start with a little timeline and with some basic information, because I don't want to take things as granted. People may know or people may have little idea. So conflict, it's been almost 11 years, and this is the 12th year, and over a decade. So almost half of the Syrian population already left the country and displaced. So almost 7 million Syrian refugees are hosted in 128 countries. These are UNHCR numbers. So imagine 80% of all Syrian refugees are located in neighboring countries, mainly Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and some surrounding countries. And Turkey almost gets the highest amount of refugees. I mean, with the current estimate, with the registered and non-registered numbers, almost 3.76 million Syrian refugees. So currently, as a member of Turkey, with the new name, As you know, we officially changed the name in United Nations with Turkey, the leading largest refugee hosting country. But it's not only limited to Syrian refugees, significant amount of refugees from Afghanistan. And currently, the estimations about Ukraine, we are having almost 200,000 Ukrainians and some from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and other countries, also from Central Asian and some African countries. So let's go. So the first entry was in Hatay. So we were with Yanis in Hatay. It was in Yaylada, as it was the boarding crossing. So the first 252 people arrived in 2011. Then actually the estimation was not like today's numbers. So Turkey was actually thinking we would be very okay to handle, let's say, 100,000 of those people. That was the estimation. So that would be enough, 100,000 people. So, but during the timeline, as you see from 2011, all of a sudden, we are by June 30, 3 million, almost 650,000 people. And actually, there's a reason, and actually it's related with the media and public discourse, that a slight, very slight decrease in the population, because these numbers will help us to read the public and the media discourse, because they are somehow in a correlationship. And also in terms of the cities, so maybe they may not be familiar to you, but I will use a map for you. So significant amount of Syrian refugees are distributed in cities. They may be officially allowed to be in those cities, but significant amount of them, they live in those cities unofficially because of the labor market issues. So imagine more than 500,000 of Syrian refugees only. I'm not even talking about Afghanistan and other countries. In Istanbul, in Gaziantep, it's one of the significant cities of southeast part of Turkey, Şanlıurfa. So I think these numbers become very interesting. So imagine Hatay, that Yanis, as I was telling you, 1/4 of the city population is made of Syrians. So imagine Kilis, let's go down, 77% of the city population. Actually, in the public discourse, they say, our city is taken. So imagine, I mean, after seeing 76%, 26%, I mean, even 10%, 20% look somehow easy. But I mean, when you look at the daily life and the public discourse, it's not that way. So I think this would be very interesting. This is our analysis from the secondary sources, but also our own studies. So there's also a timeline of the public discourse and the media discourse. So first, it was a human drama catastrophe. We have to do something in 2011, even 2012. And immediately, you know, people thought that it wouldn't be a civil war, as you know. It would be some kind of a temporary internal conflict, but then the whole story changed. Then people started questioning the future of Assad. And then in 2014, 2015, the whole public and the media, particularly the media discourse, switched to people are not intending to stay in Turkey or in Jordan or in Lebanon. We may see those countries as the host countries, but actually they function as a transit countries. So people started moving to Europe. I mean, one number from 2015, imagine children without any relatives who reached to Europe. The number of those children were 55,000 without any relative. They were just in crowds. So that was the number from 2015, and actually we made a documentary about 2 little boys with a Danish production company, and later on it was broadcasted on BBC about those stories of 55,000 children. And then, obviously, this turns into a burden, and burden needs to be shared. So Turkey said this has been like 5 years. So this cannot be handled by a single country's effort. And so, this should be our own whole effort. So then media pushed the efforts that Turkey and the European Union needs to cooperate on that. So continued like that, then media all of a sudden came up with pictures. These people are not planning to leave the country, but rather they're enjoying their time. Rather, they were expecting them to fight in their own countries, but look at the young men. They're sitting in the parks and smoking their hookahs and their own picnics. That was the picture in the media, how media portrayed them as betrayals of their own countries. And then, obviously, when we realize that they are here to stay, and nevertheless, we accept that idea. So we realize that in the middle of the timeline, they're somehow becoming a threat to our nation. Then, all of a sudden, we just started again, similar to this line. Europe needs to do something. Turkey cannot handle this. And you may also remember that was the time Europe created ECHO funds, European Commission Humanitarian Funds. And if you remember again, that was the time media and the public discourse pushed Europe, or it was the core agreement that the first piece, the 3 billion euros, were distributed in humanitarian efforts in different areas, particularly to health. And then in 2019, you saw the numbers, public and the media, similarly, and the media was actually constructing the public opinion. They're invading our cities. So, and then all of a sudden, we started seeing in 2019 citizenship, so integration. So those words, they were not welcome. So they felt, obviously, there's something behind the minds of the government people. What integration, what staying, because we thought they were temporary guests because of the war. Okay, they may be our brothers and sisters because of religion, but guest has to know when to leave. But then obviously citizenship discussions came, and then some numbers were distributed in media, whether right or wrong. So by today, I think it's something close to 150,000 citizenships because of different reasons, not because of the refugee status. Then security issue became the threat in the daily life. So obviously in 2020, we started seeing the pictures and especially the social media posts of refugees, Syrian refugees, they were doing ugly things for our girls, women, wives. So obviously, community lynchings or community attacks started taking place against Syrian populations. Then in 2022, right now what we are in, so we have a new party. And the agenda of that party is mainly, we will get rid of them. So significant amount of reception gathered from the public. And actually in the public opinions, 1 to 3% of the votes within 1 month of time, when they finished establishing the party, Victory Party. So great coverage in the media, great coverage in the social media. So simply people call it the fascist party. But then their single agenda as a party, political party, was anti-refugee. We will get rid of them the day we will get the position. So obviously, they influence the public opinion. They set the agenda. Then obviously, we saw a need from the government officials. It was the first time they said, we started sending refugees back. It was the first time within the 12-year period, they felt the need that they should comfort the public. So they started every week or every other week, they're sharing the announcements, how many people were sent, how many people are in the centers to be sent back. So to ease the public's feelings. And now we have every week or every month, we have official numbers, how many people are being sent. So that's why we have those little declines in the numbers. So when we analyze the adjectives, I mean, as part of the discourse, unfortunately, not a single positive top 10 adjective you can find in media, radios, televisions, newspapers, and social media. These are the common phrases they're used for Syrian refugees. And unfortunately, these are the adjectives we see in the public sphere as behalf of the public opinion and media's discourse. And that's what they do as a role. And media is assigned itself, creating stereotypes, blaming, victimization, establishing prejudices, or benefiting from prejudices, creating oversensitivities, and delivering anxiety and fear to the public. And unfortunately, when we look at the common practices of media, there are significant amount of group photographs of male refugees. So we need to be very careful about those male refugees. That's a concept of male refugee. And significant amount of stories about them. So things are either about them or for them, but never with them, unfortunately. So significant amount of public opinion. Everyone is talking about refugees. Everyone has an idea about refugees. Even they have shared a moment with them or not. And a significant amount of negative adjectives and portrayals, and significant, especially within the last 2 years, significant amount of numbers and statistics. But very interestingly, there is no single interview with refugees. There is no single voice of a refugees. Faces of refugees, if they're threat, male refugees, but you cannot hear their voice. There's no single interview. You cannot find an interview. It's impossible. So actually, unfortunately, all these practices, constructing the public opinion and the media discourse, simply were dehumanizing Syrian refugees. So at the same time, we can do a social experiment. People who are on the Zoom or people here, you can turn on your mobile phones. If you write refugees fleeing, obviously you will come up with these solutions. Even the Google Analytics create the single photo, the same type. Please, you will see a kind of a diagonal group of people entering the corner of the frame. That's the common abstract refugees fleeing. Because basically, this is the picture we draw in our minds. Who are they? Which sea is that? Do we think that it's Mediterranean Sea? Who says that? So media, constantly creates an abstract form of refugee definition. But when actually becomes defined, so they're coming, when they're fleeing, they're all abstract. Are they Africans? Are they African countries? Or are they from Syria or from another country? We cannot tell it. They're defined as abstract, but when they're coming to us, we have to know that who they are. They're all male refugees. They're coming to invade us. They're coming for our girls, women, and wives. Then everything becomes closer shot sizes. Turn into a closer shot size. There they become defined. And I really would like to benefit from what Haken and O'Neill just stated. If a picture is taught to tell 1,000 words, and obviously it also masks a multitude of stories. And that's what happens in the media today and the public discourse. So unfortunately, in the times, especially in the earlier times, in 2011 to 2015, until the moment of Aylan, the baby boy Aylan on the shore, they were vulnerable outsiders. But after 2015, 2016, when we felt like, oh, they're going to stay here, they turn into dangerous outsiders. So obviously, the expected result came. They became distant and voiceless others. So it's because they were economic threat, they were cultural threat. We cannot live anymore in our neighborhood that I used to live for all my life, that I have to leave because I don't feel the comfort. And now they turn into a security threat. So basically, what media and particularly the public discourse turn those people is, they used to be human subjects. Now in daily life political discussions, they turn into a political subjects. So what we actually wanted to see as people, as the project people working in this area, even if it's a policy making towards refugees, we have to realize that they have to bring something that we can be understood as a sense making. So the aim we proposed, rather instead of fear and anxiety, how we can bring hope and optimism and cooperation. Instead of to be against, and instead of defining we and them, how we can actually create for them and with them and define things as us all together, and compare the problems, how we can talk about solutions or produce solutions, threat and dangers versus opportunities and development, victim and victimization versus survivor and participation. So basically, we realize that to answer all these domains, let's say, we need to bring rights-based, needs-based, and these are actually textbook definitions, but in the case of Syrian refugees or in a particular cultural group, these two, they're not in the textbooks. We have to also deal with value-based and community-based issues, because especially in a cultural setting like Turkish people as the host community and Syrians coming to a new area, approaching their neighborhood, value and community-based approaches are similarly important when we realize to answer these. So it's not we solve the problem, and there's a great need for a joint problem-solving approach to rehumanize Syrian refugees, because we left at the point where they were dehumanized. So there are efforts by United Nations agencies, but by lots of non-governmental organizations. I would like to show one. This is a great example, but I will have a point on it.
I started to make like a rent system for my friends, to give them books, to have benefits from it. They liked the idea very much. So they told me that maybe we can make it together.
الشعب السوري هو شعب جدا مثقف، احنا كان عندنا كلمة ثلاثة بالشام مثلا أو كلمة السورية، فنحن عم نساهم إنه المجتمع كامل حد معين يحس بالأمان، لأنه هي المكان الوحيد اللي حسنت أنا ألجأ له وقت كنت كثير بخطرة، وقت كنت معرض للموت.
We can say that this country is the open doors for us. I told him always that I made the base and he made the building. We got a grant like 2 months ago. We made the establishment for the company, we made our name, we bought some books, so we made our library bigger, and we published our new product, a creative calendar. We were so happy because we have new dreams. We want to improve our work, we want to push it forward.
So there are right now, efforts organized, managed, and operated by NGOs, United Nations agencies. But I will relate my last point with this one. So joint problem solving. That was the last point that I just left. So obviously, countries like Turkey, they had similar experiences. For example, Spain, they were receiving significant amount of sub-Saharan refugees, or Italy from Libya and Northern Africa. And some other countries, they are not the transit countries, but they are the end host countries, like, for example, Finland, Hungary, or let's say Spain, Italy. So we came across together. So actually 8 countries here. So 8 countries, some universities from Spain, University of Complutense and Madrid, an NGO from Italy, CESIE, UNIMED from Italy again, Helsinki University from Finland, Menedek from a very important refugee organization from Hungary, our University Anadolu from Turkey, and Yarmouk University from Lebanon, and Lebanese International University. We came across together. We decided to work how we can actually come up with reshaping and attention and inclusion strategies for forcibly displaced people, like the Syrian refugees. So actually, our intention was there are possibly new ways that we can look for. So what we did is we defined the objectives. So this is a project that lasted for 3 years and almost finishing this month. So supported by European Commission and Horizon 2020. So basically, we wanted to define what vulnerability profiling for each country on behalf of forcibly displaced people, and how the context, vulnerability context, actually differ and change from one country to another, or from one zone of Europe to another, and region to region, and what affects the contexts, and how actually we can bring tailored attention and inclusion strategies, and that's what we simply call TAIS, and then come up with some pilot studies that what could be in the country case, country specific, a kind of advocacy-based research can contribute to some significant outcomes for addressing the needs of refugees. So these are the questions. For example, as I said, who is the vulnerable group, how we can define them, and what makes them highly vulnerable. And as we may guess, most of the time, significant amount of studies actually make research on refugees when they are in the country. Actually, we decided to understand from the very starting point, what made them decide, what was the moment they decided to leave the country. So actually, we started with the starting point of the journey, analyzed the journey, and analyzed the moment they arrived to the host country. So actually, we started and we analyzed the whole structure of the displacement. And obviously, even European Union, European Commission, similar to United Nations organizations, they have actually definitions for who the vulnerable groups are. So we are not actually interested in vulnerable people, we are interested in vulnerable groups. So according to the definition, booklet definition of European Commission, these are to be considered as the vulnerable groups. So refugees, officially recognized, asylum seekers, it might be a pending issue too, stateless people, unaccompanied and separated children, victims of trafficking, women in different forms, disabled people, specific ethnic groups and nationalities, and for example, some paperless migrants from forcibly displaced groups. And then when we started working on when we tried to understand what vulnerability was and benefiting from the definition of the vulnerability, we realized that actually it would be very hard to go with the booklet definition of vulnerability. So we decided because while we were interviewing forcibly displaced people in focus group meetings and structured meetings, operational definition needed to be there. So we worked with the operational definition of vulnerability and vulnerability context. Then it was very important for us. We established in each country, we set interviews with forcibly displaced people. We created country reports and we benefited from secondary sources. But mainly, we followed three main research domains that they need to be underlined. Socio-ecological approach, and I will share with you what we mean. It actually covers the ontological understanding, micro-level analysis, meso-level analysis, and macro-level analysis, and I will show you very quickly. And intersectoral perspective. So it's not the refugees, and we try to address their problems, joint problem solving, and actually that will be one of the important points of this meeting. We call them ARUs, Action Research Units. We establish Action Research Units. So actually, it means that every single member of the society has a voice to create a solution for refugees. And RI, normally we know responsible research and innovation. Within the last 5 years or less or more, 5 years, European Commission came up with a new R at the beginning, and they called it responsible research and innovation. So what it means, I will show you visually. So these are, besides the ontological understanding, micro-level analysis and meso-level analysis and macro-level analysis, to be more specific. So we try to identify who those highly vulnerable groups and the contexts. So each country wanted to set some tailored attention and inclusion strategies. So everything took place on the timeline, as you see. And at the end, in the coming months and the coming year, we will establish an observatory of those tailored attention and inclusion strategies. So I will quickly pass to this. So in Spain, in Italy, Finland, Hungary, Turkey, Jordan, or Turkey, Lebanon, we established 3 different groups. One of them, advisory boards. So people from United Nations agencies, kind of an executive board we established, or we called it advisory board, or some research people, some people who have expertise on these areas. We established advisory boards. We established action research units. It means that action research units are made of participants from the society who are policymakers, who are research community, media, municipality people, local governments, vulnerable group members themselves who had no voice, education community, business and industry, private sector, and civil society organizations. So every country right now, we have ARUs, Action Research Units. So we are not coming with an answer, with a solution for the vulnerable groups. In the context, according to my city's context, according to particular city's context, or particular country's context, ARUs are defining the solutions as behalf of the joint problem solving. So actually, they actually reflect the solutions, what we are planning to do to their own community of users. So the groundwork started with establishing action research units, establishing advisory boards, ethics committees, ethic documents, guidelines, and then followed with the further steps. And even as you know, we have different work packages. For example, Jordan, Lebanon, and Spain, they recently established an artificial intelligence research software. So people who want to make research, any kind of material were put into the system. You can actually, without identifying personal names, personal information, you can work in that system, and soon to be open. It's called crises. And as I said, we didn't only want to analyze their exchanges in the host community, but context of departure and the journey itself and the history, the relations with the host community and interactions between the previous 2 elements. So simply, I think this one is important because when we were sharing those socio-ecological models, action research, and responsible research innovation. This is the diagram that European Commission, let's say, recently established within the 5 years. If you're doing research and innovation, whatever you do needs to be responsible. What responsible means? It has to relate itself to the governance, to the education, ethics, open access, gender dimension, engagement. For example, to be very simple and to be very frank, in relation to the gender dimension, project officers from the Commission, during their evaluations and assessments, one of the significant questions they ask, how many females are working? So if we have in the research group, if we have from the vulnerable groups themselves, if the representation goes lower than 40%, they stop your funding. You get red. I mean, you don't even get warned. So representation becomes issue because it turns into a participation. So as I said, socio-ecological approach, we make a micro-level analysis, ontological analysis, meso-level and micro-level, which means ontological level, we try to understand the migration history, individual transit decision-making patterns, health and resilience, and other behavior, cognitive and interaction issues. Micro level, family and family-related issues, and the partners or home. Meso system, the interaction with the host community members. Macro level, policy making and the legal issues that they were under our analysis. And so obviously the research we conducted, I think it relates itself to advocacy focused research, because we actually practice our research to advocate, to reshape attention and inclusion strategies, because it involves all stakeholders of the societies, local societies. So it turns into an advocacy work. So obviously that advocacy work reflects itself in 4 areas. It needs to be responsive and relates itself to responsive and adaptive change. It has to be definitely relate itself to diversity and inclusion. It has to be open and transparent, and also relates to anticipation and reflection. And obviously, when I'm coming to one of the very last slides, you may wonder what would be the context within the European continent and Middle East. So obviously we may think that people are vulnerable. Actually, moreover, conditions make people vulnerable. So that's why it was very important for us to understand the context. So overall, in our cities, and I will show you I will benefit from another slide to reflect this in a more detailed way. So for example, if you look at the Northern Europe, according to analysis, according to our ARU, because everything is done with the ARUs. We are not doing things by ourselves with all those stakeholders. So it was reshaping an attention and inclusion strategies related itself as behalf of the vulnerability context. It was the issue of control. How we are going to control this refugee issue. So it was the context of control. If you go to West, Spain, towards Spain, it was the context of fragmented aid. Yes, there are aids, there are organizations, but they are fragmented. They're not organized. That was the problem they were facing. If you're coming towards, let's say, Turkey, Hungary and Turkey were very similar in the outcomes. The hostility. How we are going to manage the hostility, and how we are going to come up with how we're going to make things as we. And South Italy, it was a context of survival, especially with our partners from Sicily, with Chessy. It was the outcome. So basically, contexts were changing from one region to another. And so after all those analysis of economy, livelihoods, politics, governance, as I said, ontology, micro, meso, and macro level analysis. For example, I would like to be very concrete with one example. what do we mean by vulnerability? So it would be very important to reshape attention and inclusion strategies so we can touch it. For example, you're buying drinkable water to your houses every day. Have you ever thought what affects me the way that I access the drinkable water? For example, one of the criteria here, access to safe water, just to be more visual. For example, the numbers doesn't have to be correct, but let's say if you're able to access 30 liters of drinkable water every week without thinking too much, and you have money to buy it, it means that you don't have vulnerability for water, drinkable water. But if you are thinking that, oh, from 20 liters to 30 liters, I can only afford because I have to buy other things, school things for the children, then you have low vulnerability or some significant vulnerability of significant vulnerabilities for accessing to clean water. Or let's say you think that and you know that you can only buy maximum 10 liters of clean water, drinkable water. It means that you are vulnerable for accessing to clean water. And you know that your money in your pocket, the money you generate for your household altogether can only handle maximum of, let's say, 5 to 10 liters. It means that you're highly vulnerable for accessing to clean water. So actually the conditions define the context. Context define the vulnerability. For example, coming from this operational definition of vulnerability, for example, these are the countries and the regions in detail. For example, in Northern Europe, like in Finland and the similar countries, low number of forcibly displaced people, mainly young men trying to integrate. That was one factor. For example, protracted asylum process since 2015, restricted rights and access to public services, uneven quality and of legal counseling, social isolation and marginalization, labor exploitation. So we defined all these vulnerability contexts, and then we came up with, as a result, TIEs, as I said, tailored attention and inclusion strategies. I will give you the example from Turkey. For example, almost non-municipality, non-local government did ever receive diversity and inclusion training for their service providers. And those service providers were mainly actually providing services to vulnerable people, social workers. They had no training. But at the same time, when we had interviews with them, they were anti-refugees. But they were agreeing with the need that there needs to be done something for them. So with municipality from our town, we made an agreement with Arus. So it's not our given decision. It's not our given effort. It's our effort by all stakeholders of the city. Municipality said, okay, we are volunteer for this. Perfect step. Because everyone was afraid that public will get angry with us. So, you know, I cannot get elected. I cannot do this, you know, pressure. But when it's shared, it's shared. So we finished the trainings and we have the recordings. People individually said that I never thought of these issues. I was simply against those people. So municipality took the leadership. Then what happened? Izmir, they established a refugee council within municipality to follow, to oversee rights-based, needs-based, community-based, and value-based issues. So our advocacy work turned into joint problem solving. But one last thing to add, in my opinion, and when I say in my opinion, not only subjective, but it's clear that in a country like Turkey, one single central migration law doesn't solve everything. It needs to be localized in operation. For example, in our city, we don't have refugees, but people are so anti. So our context defines another way of handling the laws and the policies. But in Hatay, where you've been to, or in Kilis, 76% of the people, they're experiencing totally different things compared to us. So that's one thing that, in my opinion, local governments needs to be empowered in terms of their running their own migration-based issues, because we are so trying to manage things in very central. Single law defines everything. One size doesn't fit all. Thank you for the patience. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was incredible. I feel like there was so much to there's so much information that you gave us, and I think there's a lot to think about. I have a number of questions, but I wanted to open it up to the group.
Well, first, let's see whether there are questions
Yes,
online.
I was about to say, yeah, online.
Currently, we don't.
I saw that there was a chat. No? Okay. So microphone. So let's see where that's going.
Yes, go ahead.
So, Doran, thank you so much for this very broad and very specific presentation. I have a lot of different questions, comments. Starting with the first part of the presentation on the media. You gave us the broad overview. It would be interesting to know, I mean, there's nothing but media, right? And you're a media specialist, the media is highly fragmented and stratified. So the question for me would be, is it really that all different media? I mean, we know that broadsheet media, more like attention-seeking media, often more popular, securitizing migration issues, right? And some more liberal, more forward-thinking media are more like more differentiating there. So in their portrayal of migrants. So the question really is that you said no interviews, no voice at all. Is that really throughout the entire media spectrum, or is just a few of the mainstream outlets that you analyzed? The second is about participatory research. I think I congratulate you and the consortium for doing this. That sounds extremely interesting. One thing that I've observed, and I've worked and I advise the UN also on participation of refugees and migrants in these processes, is often the question, how do people are getting selected, right? You always say, oh, migrants, this diaspora, these people are like, who and how these people are selected, and how they, for example, I went to Turkey and to Gaziantep and to Istanbul and to talk to people who have been involved in these municipal council. So I talked to people in Istanbul who were part of this council, and they said, "Oh, we're happy." And I asked them, "Okay, what is your role? How much can you actually suggest? What is the active role?" Like, no, we don't. The government asks us things, and then we tell them what we think. And they never come back to them. There's no active programmation. So yeah, there is a council, and it's, I guess, good. But if you have a spectrum of how meaningful it is, it's definitely on the lower spectrum. So then sometimes thinking about who's invited and what the actual role is really important. And the last one, and I'm sorry for taking so much space, is about. So I understand that the vulnerability context is really important, right? And because these people are vulnerable, and we often think about the refugees as vulnerable populations. But as we all know, a focus only on victimization and vulnerability can sometimes backfire. And I think what I was trying to do with this video, and what a lot of us are arguing, is that refugees are not just victims and not just vulnerable, they're also contributors. They're also people who can benefit the community. So sometimes, and I understand that there is a full rationale for focusing on vulnerability, but on the other hand, it sometimes may be good to say, okay, there is vulnerability, but then these people are assets too. They're not just people who have nothing and need our attention, but they're people who actually are engineers and people who can contribute to such society, which in the end may also help with the entire discourse, not just there are people who are vulnerable. But again, thanks a lot for your great work, and it's not always easy to do all of these things.
I will start with the first question, if it's okay. From the very day number one, in the timeline, we saw that actually people felt like vulnerable outsiders. At the first, it was the human dignity, resilience, do no harm, all those, things that they were part of the media. But especially when those human subjects turn into political subjects, because they became the central issue of the political debate, then mainstream, significant amount of media simply kept silent. It was most of the time it was the issue. They kept silent because it was very fragile, very sensitive to touch. Because, for example, central newspapers, central social media outlets, news sites, they had some, let's say, popular opinion followers, but at the same time they had to go with on the same line with the government. So refugee issue is somehow perceived as a government given thing. So it's like significant amount of people feel like it's Erdogan's decision. So then it turns into not a humanitarian discussion, it turns into a political. So whether media significantly keep silent, or I can even name them, Yeni Akit and others, or in the same line with Erdogan, or with the similar values, they make stories, they make different coverages, but very interestingly, interviews are not there. Very interesting. They're not really touching the subject matter. So there's a great need. I mean, there are few, but I mean, it doesn't mean that within the 8 years time, 3 interviews make sense. No, it's not there. So we don't see them, we don't hear them. That's one thing. Second, it was
about participation, like the meaningfulness of participation, about how to choose people.
Exactly. That was the discussion in our project. Because are we really finding the vulnerable people or the highly vulnerable people, or were they the ones available? So that's why we, in my opinion, I should use the word benefit. We try to benefit from two areas. One is the NGOs who really do the groundwork. I mean, grassroots work with different segments of refugees. And the second one, refugee community leaders who can access to those who cannot come to our project, even if you don't go to them. So that was one of the main discussions. And in my opinion, my personal opinion is, it is really hard to get those really highly vulnerable people and carry their opinions. That there's a great need to work on it. In my opinion, there needs to be a way, there needs to be different ways to find those people who are under the bridges, groups of refugees. Because people who have access to NGOs, actually, in my opinion, they are somehow better off because they're already cooperating. And the third one, in my opinion, it was
the focus on vulnerability. So whether it sometimes can backfire, and whether a focus on them being able to contribute and being assets may also counterbalance some of those negative stereotypes.
Within the couple of months, it became an issue. Last week in Ankara, I delivered the presentation of how refugees actually can be connected to communication for development. So they can be understood as an object of development. For example, I'm in touch with a colleague from Norway, Martha Wilhelmsen from Stavanger University. She's simply working on the innovation aspect of refugees in different areas. That's what you said exactly. Turkey is just getting there because it's a hot topic. Because when you're talking about refugees' involvement in development, it means that we accept them to be here. They're part of the society. They're part of the labor work. Even if you look at ILO's numbers, almost more than 90% of refugees are unregistered. We have to solve that problem too. So then officially we can talk about their contribution to development, but there's a great need. In my opinion, there needs to be, and it's an area that needs to be worked on it. So it can maybe ease in the public backfire again, as you said, but because they're part of the labor force. I will give you an example that you've been to Gaziantep. I was with the Association of the Chamber of Commerce. Right now, I mean, it's a big city, gigantic city with a great trade network to Middle East, to Arabic countries. More than 10% of the members are now Syrians. Very significant number. But very interestingly, people who live with refugees, Association Chamber of, they are proud of it. People in Izmir who have no contact with refugees, they only see them on media, the biggest hate discourse. So, but in my opinion, at some point that development issue, refugees' involvement in development needs to be there. Personally, I'm working on it. I just delivered last week how we can actually talk about their involvement in development issues. Definitely, I totally agree with you. Actually, I take it as a point rather than a question. Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me conclude with the question.
Still no question online?
Doesn't.
So thank you so much for this great presentation. I have a quick comment that will lead into a question. So the quick comment is that maybe that so I'm making reference to one of the earlier slides where you were showing the evolution over time of the public discourse in the media about how the refugees are perceived in Turkey. Maybe one of the reasons why there is this evolution is the factor of time. Right, so when the Syrian war started, there was probably an idea that this could be quickly fixed. You know, the international community was not necessarily in favor of a Bashar regime staying in place. And then for factors that we are not going to discuss that are like outside of even Syrian's border, he ended up staying in place. So what was supposed to be a quick issue and quick visitors turned out to be a question that we still don't know how long this is going to last. And I think that the timing issue is probably what is turning some people who were maybe in favor in the beginning, less in favor now, because how long are you going to stay? Are you here forever? And so that's why this issue of citizenship was so problematic. So that leads me to my question. If you were using your crystal ball and to make a very bad parallel between what happened with the Syrians in Turkey and what is happening now with the Ukrainians in Poland, Romania, and Moldova and Hungary, do you think that they are going to go through the same process where right now the entire world obviously is uniting to help Ukraine and to help Ukrainians, and they are welcome in Poland and Romania and Moldova, and people really mobilize? Do you think that over time, we have, again, no idea how long this conflict is going to last? It's not going to be resolved, as some people say, by the end of the year. One element of response, also based on what you said, Syrians are men and women. And in the Ukrainian context, because men are not allowed to leave the territory, it is mostly women and children. So what do you think?
First things first, in my opinion, I will start from the end. Turkish public needs to be well informed. Even if you look at the Syrian refugees in Turkey, the significant amount of population are there not men. More than 2/3 of the population are made of women, girls, and children. So imagine within 3.6 million, it makes something like 2.5 million of them. So we have to correct it, because from the very beginning, in the case of Ukrainians, media show that it's the woman coming. But in our case, media show that men are coming. So the construction was problematic from the very beginning. I mean, more than 2/3 of the population, Syrian population in Turkey, women, girls, and children. And another thing, and I think I may even say it off the record, but I have in the Ukrainian case, the picture defined as there's an evil, they're escaping from the evil. In our case, it's a bit blurred. And from the very beginning, it was Assad. But then Assad is no longer there in the discussions. There's no one escaping from Assad. Now, the public in Turkey is fragmented. Because as I said, the issue about refugees is politically defined and politically attached. It's his plan. It turns into his plan. So that's why it will, in my opinion, the perception of refugees in the public sphere and the media will be forever segmented. I don't like to talk like this forever, but because people are positioned politically, so it will stay politically fragmented and divided. But in the case of Ukraine, from the very beginning, they were not even defined as women. Case of women came later. They were escaping from the evil's attack. Now Christian brothers and sisters, not even brothers, are Christian women, sacred. So I see similarities in terms of the vulnerabilities, but from the very beginning, the definitions rooted differently.
Question. I'm curious a little bit about, so you've talked about this work in many different countries. So everything from even the timeline around media and how, Daniel asked the question about variability in terms of media, in terms of, is this the one picture that all media is presenting, which it sounds like it is. Did you see any variability across countries? Or these are really, the lack of inclusion with any voices of refugees, these adjectives, this is really consistent across all these countries.
Even in the public sphere, media sphere, for example, in the case of Italy and Spain, they can easily talk about LGBTQ plus refugees. They don't exist in Turkey. We don't see them. We don't want to see them.
They exist.
Well, no, they exist. But our main standing point is, really? Are there people like that? We don't see them. They're invisible. So there are none. We are not looking for them. So obviously, in the discussions, for example, when the country reports came out, significant amount of LGBTIQ plus definitions, wordings in their country reports. Imagine these will be open access documents in the public. Okay, we didn't have any, in the interviews, we didn't have any indication of LGBTIQ plus communities, whether they were afraid or we didn't have, but how we are going to make it public becomes an issue of lawsuit. So even you either obscure it or you simply with your original attitude, you don't see them as if they don't exist. So for example, country reports, that's why in my opinion, they're very significant because they help us to understand what is there and in what conditions they are there. And in my opinion, it also gives us a response to the question, who is not there? Invisible and watchless. So for example, in my opinion, kind of reports of Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, I would prefer to look at the reports who are defined, but who are not there. So it would require two types of reading. But Italy, Spain, others, they clearly define all those groups, but some groups are missing in our reports.
And it would be interesting to see if there are lessons that could be learned potentially, maybe from some countries that are open to this, or I don't know if it's lessons, but that sort of brings me to my next question. Azgay also had this question too, in terms of next steps and sustainability. I mean, this is an incredible amount of work and there's so much promise, it's proof that this is working. Do you have thoughts about sustainability, expanding to other countries? Yanis mentioned thinking about as Ukrainian refugees are coming around. I mean, do you have thoughts about next steps in the future and sustainability?
Number one, we agreed as consortium members to establish a kind of observatory hub because it really brings to the policy making issue. So we plan to use this hub as a policy advocacy hub, so monitor what policies and legal issues are being developed. Second one, starting with our partnering countries and institutions, what efforts are there and to be shared in between and to reflect to other countries. So we agreed that it shouldn't be like, okay, we did it. So we created country specific tailored attention and inclusion strategy. That's it? No. So we want to create a hub with extra partners because, for example, at behalf of Horizon 2020, there's significant amount of migration projects that we want to actually create that hub as kind of an knowledge and experience sharing. So reflect more.
Any thoughts about
Soon to
it?
be.
That's great. Any thoughts about expanding to additional countries?
Yeah, that's what actually in our last Sicily meeting, it was the case. We want more institutions. We need their experiences. They need ours. We want more countries, definitely. Yeah. And it will be most likely in Turkey. At this point, it looks like that hub will be part of our university, established by all members, but with open to any country, any organization. Definitely. Thank you.
Other questions? I'm just checking online.
It's 2:30 before we can tackle them.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And there's so much more to learn. So we look forward to hearing more.
Thank you so much.
So again, thank you so much for coming to CSD today and enlightening us with this amazing research. And I also want to extend my thanks to Anindita Desgupta and the School of Social Work for co-sponsoring this event, and of course for CGC Istanbul for helping us with the technical and the Zoom. So again, thanks, and we'll see you soon with another event.
And we would also like to thank Colombia's Center for Sustainable Development, and thank you for Nezih for his amazing speech. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.